page 11. Masters of the Planet, Ian Tattersall, 2012. The Search for Our Human Origins. 0.2. Symbolism and the Art of the Caves. Best exemplified by the famous animal images on the ceilings and walls of caves such as Spain's Altamira and France's Lascaux and Chauvet, the raw power and sophistication of this ancient art is somehow magnified by the knowledge that its painters lived in an unthinkably remote epoch of modern human history. For, despite their brilliance in color and concept, these extraordinary works were the product of hunter-gatherers who lived around the peak of the last ice age, between about 35,000 and 10,000 years ago. These were harsh times of cool summers and bitterly long winters, during which trees were often almost entirely banished from a landscape that is thickly wooded today. The antiquity of this art is astonishing, but exposure to it nonetheless makes you fully understand Picasso's alleged remark that the Ice Age painters had left him little to accomplish. Certainly, it's impossible to imagine better evidence that the wonderful and unprecedented human creative spirit was already fully formed at that distant point in modern prehistory. This realization had not come easily. Intuitively, it was difficult for 19th-century scientists to accept that the ancient Ice Age inhabitants of southern France and northern Spain had created an artistic tradition embracing painting, engraving, sculpture, and bas-relief that, at its best, had equaled or even exceeded in its power anything achieved since. After the first, and among the finest, cave paintings were discovered at Altamira in 1879, immediate admiration rapidly gave way to doubts. How could such refined and accomplished art possibly be the work of hugely ancient people? How could it have been produced by savages without fixed abode, mere hunters and gatherers who had roamed the landscape and availed themselves of its bounty, quite the antithesis of civilized 19th-century folk who worshipped in magnificent cathedrals, built sturdy houses for shelter, and put the land and what grew on it to work for them? It took repeated discoveries of ancient art, in virgin caves and at untouched archaeological sites, to convince the world that you could indeed have both a sophisticated mind and a primitive lifestyle, to make acceptable the notion that, those many tens of millennia ago, people had existed who did not live in houses and till the fields, but who nonetheless made fabulous art, led mysteriously complex lives, and were just like us in all their cognitive essentials. Of course those ancient people, and the larger societies whose beliefs and values those images at Lascaux and Altamira embodied, vanished long ago. So, although we have at our disposal miraculously preserved material evidence of the creative spirit of those long-gone humans, we will never know for sure just what those beliefs and values were. Nonetheless, for all their cultural and temporal remoteness, we can be secure in the knowledge that those ancient people of Altamira and Lascaux and elsewhere were us in all essentials, imbued with the same remarkable human spirit that animates us today. Significantly, the walls of Lascaux and other caves are not decorated only with animal images, drawn with the deftness, observation, and clever stylization that placed their creators among the greatest artists ever. Among and upon those instantly recognizable animal figures, the artists placed geometric motifs, grids, lines of dots, dart-like signs that clearly had very specific meaning to their creators. Sadly, today we have no way of knowing just what it was the artists had intended to express, but if you consider the clear specificity of the images together with the complex ways in which they are juxtaposed, you rapidly begin to realize that this art was not simply representational. It was symbolic. Every image in this cave and others, realistic or geometric, is drenched with meaning that goes far beyond its mere form. Even though we can't know exactly what the art of Lascaux meant either to its creators or to those for whom it was intended, whether the two were the same, we'll never be certain. What is undeniable is that this art signified something well beyond what we are able to observe directly. And this is, oddly enough, One of the most powerful of the many reasons why so many of us resonate to Ice Age art at the most profound of levels. Because, for all the infinite cultural variety that has marked the long road of human experience, if there is one single thing that above all else unites all human beings today, it is our symbolic capacity, our common ability to organize the world around us into a vocabulary of mental representations that we can recombine in our minds, in an endless variety of new ways. This unique mental facility allows us to create in our heads the alternative worlds that are the very basis of the cultural variety that is so much a hallmark of our species. Other creatures live in the world more or less as nature presents it to them, and they react to it more or less directly, albeit sometimes with remarkable sophistication. In contrast, we human beings live to a significant degree in the worlds that our brains remake, though brute reality too often intrudes. Human beings are unusual in many ways, physical as well as cognitive. But our unique mode of processing information is without any question the element that, more than any other, marks us off as different from other creatures, and it's certainly what makes us feel different. What is more, as I hope this book will convince you, it is entirely without precedent. Not only is the ability for symbolic reasoning lacking among our closest living relatives, the great apes, such reasoning was apparently also absent from our closest extinct relatives and even from the earliest humans who looked exactly like us. At the same time, we modern humans have a huge amount in common intellectually with all of those relatives, vanished and living, and, even more to the point, no matter how much we may vaunt our rationality, we are most certainly not entirely rational beings, a point that should need no belaboring to any observer of our species. One major reason for this is that, through the vagaries of a long and eventful evolutionary history, some of the newest components of our brains, those strange, complex organs in our heads that govern our behavior and experience, communicate with each other via some very ancient structures indeed. Because of the peculiar construction resulting from their complex history, our brains are far from directly comparable to a feat of human engineering. Indeed, they are probably not comparable at all. For engineers always strive, even where they are consciously or unconsciously constrained, for optimal solutions to the problems they are facing. In contrast, during the long and untidy process that gave rise to the modern human brain, what was already there was always vastly more influential on the historical outcome, what actually did happen, than any potential for future efficiencies could be. And thank goodness for that. After all, if our brains had been designed like machines, if they had been optimized for any particular task, they would be machines, with all of the predictability and tedious soullessness that this would imply. For all their flaws, it is the very messiness and adventitiousness of our brains that makes the AMA and USA the intellectually fertile, creative, emotional, and interesting entities that they and we are. This perspective conflicts with the view of evolution that most of us were taught in school, where, if it was mentioned at all, this most fundamental of biological phenomena was usually presented as a matter of slow, inexorable refinement, constantly tending toward achieving the perfect. So, before we embark on the human story, it seems reasonable to take a few moments to look more closely at the remarkable process that operated to produce USA, because, extraordinary as we may justifiably think ourselves, we are actually the result of a perfectly ordinary biological history. Page 13.